There we go. Okay, so standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. We know that. We've used it. A is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is my constant. Okay, so I'm putting this on here so you will have these resources, this information for the test. When I am solving a quadratic equation, we are looking for what? We're looking for what equals? We're looking for the variable, what the variable equals. Normally it will be x, but we might have another variable. We're looking for what the variable equals. That's what I mean when I say solve. What does x equal? X equals 4 and 5, or x equals 10 and 7. You might have another variable, so I'm looking for what the variable equals. Okay, I could have blank, 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 or I could have blank, blank, or blank solutions. Fine, you're good. 2, 1, or none. 2, 1, or 0. Okay, if I'm solving a quadratic, I could have 2, 1, or 0 solution. And remember, a solution is the same as x-intercept, roots, or 0. So if they ask you to find the roots, they're asking you to solve it. Same thing. So that's why I put that on there. So whenever you solve a quadratic, you could have 2, 1, or 0. So 3 ways to solve a quadratic. The first way is solve using square root. This is the easiest way, so this is the way I check for first. This is what we did yesterday. Solve using square roots. How do I tell that I can use the square root method? Look at your notes if you need to from yesterday. How do I tell what is the big indicator that I can use the square root method? Yeah, so no single x or no bx term. So that will tell you that you can use the square root method, which is by far the easiest way out of the 3. So I always check to see if I can use that way first. There's no single x or bx term. All you see is x squared in numbers. Okay, if I'm solving that, I need to get blank on one side and blank on one side. I need to get what on one side and what on the other side. X squared on one side and get the numbers on the other side. So unlike factoring quadratic formula where I have to get it equal to 0, I want to get x squared by itself. And then I'll put a side note here. After I get x squared by itself, what can I do to both sides? Why do I want to get x squared by itself so I can do what to both sides? Square root. So I'll put this so you can kind of remember that you square root both sides. I didn't put that on there. So once you get x squared by itself, you're going to square root both sides. And it's plus or minus, don't forget. Okay, let's look at a few examples. Example 1, r squared plus 1 equals 10. We're using different variables, it doesn't really matter. As I look at this, why can't I use the square root method? So as I look at example 1, why can I use the square root method? There's no single r in this case. There's no single r variable. There's no br or bx term. So we can use the square root method. So get r squared by itself. So what do I do to get r squared by itself? Subtract 1. Subtract 1. R squared equals what? 9. Once I get r squared by itself, what do you do? Square root both sides. So r equals square root of 9 plus or minus, don't forget plus or minus, 3. So a positive 3 and a negative 3. Okay, any questions on that? Example 2, as I look at example 2, why can I do the square root form or the square root method? There's no single b term in this case, so no single middle x term or b term. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides because I want to get b squared by itself. So I'm adding 1 to both sides. I get 2b squared equals what? Negative 27. Divide by 2, so b squared equals what? I said just leave it as a fraction for now. Don't get it out. Just leave it as a fraction until you take the square root. And if it's not a perfect square, then you can get a decimal. Now that I have b squared by itself, what do I do to both sides? Square root. Now, as I try to square root it, what do you notice? I take the square root of a negative. I cannot take the square root of a negative, so it is no solution. So either use that symbol or write out no solution. So square root of a negative I can never do. Okay. Square root method, is that the easiest for most of you guys? I think. I don't want to assume things, but I think from what the homework looked like yesterday. Okay, let's look at the second way. So I always check square root first. This is kind of a step-by-step process. Step 1, see if I can use the square root method. Step 2, I like trying to factor it. Sometimes factoring is a lot easier than this quadratic formula. Sometimes it's not. If you end up having to do the 4-step way to factor, it's not really any easier than the quadratic formula, but sometimes factoring can be really easy. If I want to solve using factoring, I set equal to what? 0. And then I factor and set each factor equal to 0. So this is just kind of a quick refresher on this so that you kind of have an idea, something to look at, kind of to remind you when you're looking at the test next Wednesday. Okay. Example 3, as I look at example 3, why would I not be able to use the square root method on example 3? What term in there tells me that I cannot use the square root method? The what? The 7x, which is the bx part. So right there, because I see the 7x, I cannot do square root, so I'm going to move on to try to factor it. If I want to try to factor, I get it equal to 0. So what would be the easiest way to get this equal to 0? Subtract 8, subtract 8. So x squared plus 7x minus 8 equals 0. So this is a good refresher for some of you on factoring. Now as I look at this, you should have a pretty good idea how to factor this. If you look at this and have absolutely no idea how to factor this, then you're behind and you need to come in before next Wednesday. So as I look at this, we ignore the equal 0. Is there a GCF? No. So I look at this and I look at my reference sheet. It is a trinomial. It can either be the shortcut trinomial way or the 4-step trinomial way. Which way is it going to be? The shortcut, because there is a positive 1 in front of x squared. So I can start with 2 parentheses, x is in front. And then how do I figure out what numbers go in there?
Just see what to multiply to get negative 8 and add to get 7.
Yep, 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 8 and add to give me 7. I gave you a shortcut. Since 7 and 8 are right next to each other, what will one of the numbers probably be? A 1. So let's think. 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 8 and add to give me a positive 7. Negative 1, positive 8. They multiply to give me negative 8, and they add negative 1 plus 8 gives me positive 7. Is this solved yet? No, because I want to know what the variable equal. What does x equal? So you're going to take each factor, set it equal to 0. And now you have 2 simple equations. Add 1, x equals 1, minus 8, x equals negative 8. So this is all review. It's just a good refresher. I'm fine with that. The nice thing about the year long is that I can take time and not have to rush through stuff. So if you can take year-long Algebra 2, I would make sure you're signed up for that if you think you're going to struggle. Example 4, what 2 terms tell me that I cannot do the square root?
Negative 40n and 3n.
Yep, I have 2 with have a single n. So the negative 40n and the 3n tell me I cannot do the square root. So I'm going to try to factor it. If I try to factor this, I need to get it equal to what? So I'm going to subtract 3n from both sides. And I'm going to put it underneath the negative 40n because I can actually combine those. So what do I have on the left side now?
N squared minus 43n.
Equals 0. Good. N squared minus 43n equals 0. As I look to factor this, use the purple reference sheet. I always check it to see if I can factor what out first. A GCF. Is there a GCF for n squared minus 43n?
Yeah.
There's no coefficient, but there's a variable n. So I'm going to bring an n out front. Good. If I bring an n out front, n times what gives me n squared? N. And n times what gives me a negative 43n? Negative 43. is this solved for n yet? No. So I need to take each part. So n is technically a factor. If this was just a constant, if this was just a 2 or a 5, you wouldn't have to set it equal to 0. But since there's an n there, I need to set it equal to 0. And then n minus 43 equals 0. So one answer is already solved. N equals 0 is one answer. The next one, add 43, n equals 43. So my two answers are n equals 0 and n equals 43. Okay, questions on those two? If you're still struggling with factoring, please come see me before Wednesday. Okay, number 3, solve using the quadratic formula. This is the third way. This is kind of the way I always kind of do try last. I'll look at your study guide. On the test, part of it will be you can choose any method you want to. So if you want to use the quadratic formula for every single one on that section of the test, more power to you. It'll probably take you double the time. But that's up to you. But make sure you read the directions to see if what it tells you to use. Solve using quadratic formula. Set it equal to what? 0. I need to plug in my a value, the b value, and the c value. And I'll go ahead and write this right here for you. If you want to put the standard form there. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that's how you tell using the standard form. A is the number in front of x squared. B is the number in front of x. C is the constant. We're good with that. You guys have, from what I'm seeing, you guys are good with finding A, B, and C. The formula. So I've told you you will have the formula for the test. So x equals. So I would make sure it's correct as you're writing it down, because you will be able to use this on the test. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. So that's a negative 4 times a times c all over what? 2 times a. So that is what you will have for the test. You will have the formula. I do not want to make you do more things than you need to. You already have a lot of stuff to remember. Okay, so that's how I set it up. That's how I use the quadratic formula. Let's look at example 5. As I look at example 5, what part on example 5 is going to tell me that I cannot do the square root? I always check square root first because that's by far the easiest. The 10x. There's a single x. I cannot do the square root. So I'm going to move on to try to factor it. Step number 2. Whether I factor or do quadratic, I need to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 1 from the right side. So make sure it's in standard form. 8x squared plus 10x minus 1 equals 0. So now it's kind of up to you. Is there a GCF? No. As I try to factor this, which way am I going to have to use to factor this? It's a trinomial. Is there a 1 in front? No. So I'm going to have to do the long way. So if you get to the factoring and you have the option of choosing between any of the 3, and you don't even want to factor doing the long way, you can just skip right to quadratic formula. Unless it says solve by factoring and that's it, then you can choose whatever you want. Let's try to just factor real quick. I'm going to need, step 1, I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me what? Negative 8. So that was the first one. 8 times negative 1. So I need 2, actually that's step 2. I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 8 and add to give me what? 10. So what are some things that multiply to give me negative 8? 4 and 2 will never give me 10. And 8 and 1 will never give me 10. So it doesn't factor. If you cannot find the 2 numbers that work, then it doesn't factor. So if I go straight to quadratic formula, I need to find A, B, and C. A value is what? B value is 10. And C value is negative 1. Plug it into your formula. X equals negative B, so negative 10, plus or minus the square root of 10 squared, negative 4 times A, which is 8, times C, which is negative 1, all over, we'll do example 6 on the back so you can run into that space, that's fine, I didn't give you a ton of space, 2 times 8, 2 times A. Any questions on plugging it in? Okay, start with the top left. I have a negative 10 plus or minus 10 squared, 100. Now, this is where I see a lot of people get caught up, is because you lose that negative. This is a negative 4. We are multiplying three numbers. Negative 4 times 8 is a what? Times a negative 1. Positive 32. So this is a positive 32. All over what? 16. And then go ahead, negative 10 plus or minus, what's 100 plus 32? 132. Is 132 a perfect square? No. So when you get your two answers, negative 10 plus the square root of 132 all over 16, and negative 10 minus square root of 132 all over 16. Now when you plug it in your calculator, make sure you put parentheses around the top part, like we talked about before. So plug it in your calculator real quick and tell me what you guys get. Round to two places. If you don't know how to do this, look back on the videos. I show you on your calculator how to plug it in. We've done it a lot. Negative 10 plus the square root of 132 over 16 is what? Point what? Point 0.09 is what you should have gotten. Is that what you got? Okay. You don't have it pulled up anymore? Okay, 0.09. And then negative 10, I showed you the shortcut. Use the arrow button and just plug in a negative where the plus was. What did you get for that one?
Negative 1.31.
Yep, negative.
And if it's hard to remember,
Yeah, write it like this.
Draw your little picture of where what your parentheses need to look like and stuff,
Yeah.
so you know, okay, yes, it looks right.
Okay. Questions on that?
Okay, let's do example 6. I'm going to do example 6 on the back. Example 6. So it looks like this. 6b squared minus 11b equals 35. Do quadratic, or square root. Why can I not do square root? What term? Negative 11b. There's the single b. Cannot do the square root, so I move on to factoring. If I try to factor, let's set it equal to 0. So whether I factor or do quadratic formula, I need to get it set it equal to 0 anyway. So 6b squared minus 11b minus 35 equals 0. If I look at this, what's 6 times negative 35? I don't know, whatever. This is going to be a hard way to factor anyway, so I would just do quadratic formula. Okay? So if it ends up being the hard way, then unless it specifically says you have to factor, I tend to just do quadratic formula because it's easier, I think, than trying to do the 4-step way. Let's just do that. A, B, and C. A is what? B is, and C is negative 35. Okay, let's start plugging in. X equals, in this case it's going to be B equals, because I'm trying to find B and not X. Not a big deal. That B is confusing. If you don't really need to put the B equals. We're trying to find B, but don't get confused with the B here. So negative B, negative 11, plus or minus the square root of negative 11 squared minus 4 times A, which is what? What's A? Times C, which is what? All over 2 times what? 6. Plugging it in. You guys can do this. Negative times a negative 11. Positive 11 plus or minus the square root. Start just simplifying. Negative 11 squared. 121. Now do not get confused. Negative 4 times 6 is what?
negative 24.
Times a negative 35.
Positive something.
positive something, I don't know, use calculator. Negative 24 times a negative 35. I really don't know. Someone needs to do it. Negative 24 times a negative 35. Positive something. 840? Okay. All over 12 equals 11 plus or minus 121 plus 840 is 961 a perfect square? What is the square root of 961? 31. Yeah, take the square root of 961 if you're not sure and see if it's a perfect square. So that is a perfect square, so it becomes just 31. So the square root of 961 is 31. So that worked out kind of nice for you guys. When you plug it in, 11 plus 31, all divided by 12, and 11 minus 31, all divided by 12. (11 plus 31 divided by 12?
13.58.
Nope. You have to use parentheses around the top part still. So either do 11 plus 31 first, press enter, and then divide by 12, or use parentheses. I should get what? What is it?
1.3.
Huh? What's it? What's 11 plus 31? That divided by 12. 3.5. So you have to do 11 plus 31 first, press enter, get an answer, and then divide by 2. Don't just plug it in. Or put parentheses around the top part. What's 11 minus 31 divided by 12? If you guys aren't doing this, you're not practicing. I'm tired of you. Some of you guys just sitting there. Negative 1.67. And then you complain because you don't know how to do it. Well, if you're not doing it with us, it's not going to help you. So those are your two answers. Okay, so there's the notes. Like I said, this reference sheet will be helpful to use on your study guide and use on your test.
So don't lose it, there won't be another one.
I'm not giving you